The year was 1958. Elizabeth Taylor was a hot star in Hollywood. The U.S. had launched its first successful satellite, Explorer 1, and Alaska became a state, and Winchester released the .264 Winchester Magnum. Alaska would last a lot longer. Hi everyone. Hey, the .264 Win Mag has been a mystery cartridge with a lot of allure and a lot of confusion. Folks are always asking about it. Why isn't it more popular? Actually, it's pretty close to moribund, if not flat out dead. I don't know if anyone chambers for it anymore. But it is a fascinating cartridge that ran a battle in roughly the 1960s between it and the .270 Winchester and the 7mm Remington Magnum. And you might be surprised at which one was the best ballistically. We're going to dive into all of that. But first, a little bit of history on the .264 Winchester Magnum. Now, this was the era of speed, and missiles and satellites and jet fighter planes, and everything was going full speed, including race cars. So Winchester looked at something that had come out from Roy Weatherby .257 Weatherby Magnum, and that was getting quite a bit of press, pretty popular. They thought, what could we do with that .375 H&H belted Magnum to make something that would compete against that? That was some of the incentive behind the .264 Win Mag. Now, this was a little bit unusual because in those days, 6.26, 6.5, that was kind of foreign stuff. The only other American-made 6.5 cartridge to that point had been the .256. Newton, Charles Newton, I'm pretty sure, made that one. And it was called the .256, even though it shot the same bullet as the .264 or all the 6.5s. The bore diameter was .256. The bullets were .264. So you've got a 0.08 difference. It's the same as with a .30 caliber and a .308 diameter bullet. You got to fill those grooves. So he called it the .256, and Winchester actually built loads for it. It wasn't Winchester at the time, it was Western Cartridge Company, which later got bought up into, I think, actually they bought Winchester rather than Winchester buying Western Powder. I'm not sure which way that went. I have to check that out again, but eventually they got together. So they were loading for that one, and it was a fairly popular cartridge for a while. But, well, Winchester came out with this .264. They thought they might have something that would really compete against the .270. Now, the 7-Rem Mag wasn't out yet, so they were doing okay. It came out in a rifle they called the Westerner. It was, of course, the rifleman's rifle, the Model 70 bolt-action Winchester rifle. That was the rifle of the time. 26-inch barrel, so they could really milk the velocity out of this. And they pushed a 140-grain spire point bullet, 3,200 feet per second. At least that's what they claimed. Part of the knock against it was that very few people actually got that velocity. But 1958, 59, 60, really the guns didn't come out until 59, even though they announced the cartridge in 58. But folks just didn't have chronographs, and they weren't really testing it. They just went hunting and hoped that they were getting what was advertised. So they were shooting that, and another rifle that they came out with was the featherweight version of the Model 70, a little bit lighter, classy-looking rifle. But that one only had a 24-inch barrel, so then they were suffering a little more velocity loss. This is going to sort of add up on them here in a bit. The biggest problem was soon after this started, the gun writers started panning it for burning out barrels. There was so much flame coming out of that into that narrow little bore that it was burning the throats out fairly quickly. Now, why people weren't complaining as much about the .257 kind of blows me away, because look at that. It's the same case, it's just a 25 caliber with double radius shoulders instead of the 26 caliber. It's going to burn out throats faster than the .264, but it just doesn't have the same reputation as an incredible barrel burner. And yet it is. You can expect maybe 1,000 rounds from one of these before the accuracy starts going south, which isn't a big deal in a hunting rifle, but Winchester was kind of pushing this as a varmint hunting rifle. Westerner, mule deer, pronghorn, sheep, and then the big varmints, rock chucks and stuff. And if you try shooting this at a big population of rodents out in the field. You're going to shoot a lot and you're going to burn that barrel out really quickly because it got so hot. Now, I've heard that they came out with stainless steel barrels in that Westerner, but I haven't been able to confirm it. So if any of you know for sure, be nice, get that information. So that's how it was flying along from about 1959, 1960, 61, and it was doing okay, starting to suffer a little bit from that barrel burnout thing that was going around. But then came the big threat. In 1962, Remington did two things. They came up with a new version of their bolt-action rifle they called the Model 700, and they chambered it for a brand new cartridge called the 7mm Remington Magnum. Now again, look at those two cartridges. What minimal differences do you see? Essentially, one's 26 caliber, one's 28. Why did the 28 take off? And it did, because it could shoot heavier bullets. The twist rate in this 264 was 1 in 9, 1 in 10, depending on who was making the rifle. So they could only stabilize about a 140 grain spire point bullet. Whereas the 7mm had a faster twist rate and it would stabilize bullets as heavy as 175 grains. Here was a more versatile Western big game cartridge. Almost as fast as the 264, but it would throw those heavier bullets. Sure, you could shoot the 120s, 140s, 160s, but man, you get up to 175 and you've really got yourself an elk cartridge, moose, even the big bears. So, man, once that 7 came on, that poor old 264 just started to slide off the map. And it's really never recovered. Now, Winchester will frequently come out with rifles chambered for it. They had a few in the mid-'80s, again in the mid to late '90s. They'll make a few, sell some ammo, but they just never really take off. And then that suggests one needs to investigate all of the 6.5s, because as rare as they were in the 1950s and 60s, look at how common they are now. And it just sort of blows me away how the 264 went from, who cares, what is it, to you've got to have it, man. So exactly what was going on to make that happen? Yeah. Essentially, it comes down to this 6.5 Creedmoor, I hate to have to tell you guys. That's what seems to have made the difference. But why that made the difference instead of, say, the 260, which came first, or at least before the 6.5 Creedmoor, is probably because of the long-range shooting that started to happen after this. In the 2010 and into the teens, that really picked up. Laser rangefinders, wind meters, and all that extreme range target shooting popularity really drove sales of the 6.5 Creedmoor. So some of the other 6.5s that tried to make it, in the 1966 Remington 6.5 Remington Magnum Short, based on the same 375 H&H belted case, but it was sort of the foreshadowing the short fats that came later in the 2000s. Then there was the 6.5 by 55 Sweet. There was a European cartridge that was extremely popular over there, but little known over here. In fact, there were a lot of 6.5s across Europe and really Asia, Japan. They were just really popular. Might be part of the reason they weren't popular here, Americans being what we are. We weren't going to mess around with some foreign stuff. But it was a darned effective cartridge, and it still is extremely popular. Why the Winchester couldn't pick up on that, I don't know. A Wildcat that was really popular was the 6.5-06, and that eventually got legitimized pretty late in the game. Yeah, that's hanging on, but it's not exactly real popular anymore either. Then there was the fairly recent 284 Winchester short fat that got necked down to 6.5 for target long-range shooting, and that became fairly popular. And then, of course, that one got followed up by the ultimate short fat 6.5, the new PRC. That's about, what, 3-4 years old now? And I think that one's the one that's really going to hang on. And then at the far end of the scale is that little Grendel 6.5, and that is surprisingly popular. Almost no recoil, of course, and it does pretty darn well out to even 300 yards with putting enough energy out there for a deer. Not the flattest shooting thing in the world, but man, with 123 grain bullets, it's pretty darn effective. Then you get to the top end, and now we're really stepping on the 264 Win Mag's toes. The 6.5 RPM from Weatherby, which is the 284 Winchester, stretched. So So you've got the same body diameter, rebaited rim, stretched it out to 30-06 length, more powder, and you're doing about the same as the PRC. Then there's the 26 Nosler. And that one, you talk about burning your throats out. Look at the powder volume in that thing compared to the 264. It's a much fatter cartridge, sort of based off that 404 Jeffrey fat cartridge size. And then there's the 6.5 300 Weathery Magnum. And that's going back to Wildcat days. That thing was actually out in the 50s as a Wildcat. But, you know, it was such a throat burner. If the 264 Win Mag was losing out because of burning out barrels, imagine the popularity of that would have been. Not much. So the 6.5s now are a big deal. What would happen if Winchester had come out with this in the last 10 years instead of in 1958? Hard to say. The real question is, how does it perform compared to its competitors in its day, and why did it lose out? Here's the 270. Here's the 7-rem mag. 264 right in the middle. Here are some interesting statistics on those. Hey folks, when you're not deciding which 6.5 millimeter you want to buy, perhaps you could take a look at rsotv.com. That's our channel in which we cover more details on ballistics and guns and ammo and hand loading and hunting and all sorts of great videos. And if you become a member of rsotv.com, you get 15% off on everything in the RSO store. So check the link below and join us. We'd love to have you. I ran a chart naturally, and I've got the numbers will flash up for you guys. And we're going to compare the ballistics, and what we're going to find out is that the 264 Win Mag is superior ballistically to both of these. It might not have the versatility the 7-rem mag, certainly doesn't, and it might not be as light recoiling as the 270, but wow, when you look at these numbers, I think you're going to be impressed. We'll use a 143 grain bullet in the Win Mag. That's about all it's going to stabilize. The 270 Win, I went with a 145 grain bullet because it's really got a high BC. This was the ELDX bullet from Hornady. I wanted to show off what the Winchester could really do, even though back in the day it wasn't doing quite this well. We're going to give it, though, all the credit it can get. And the 7-rem mag, 160 grain bullet, pretty high BC at .555. It kind of puts it in the same category. I don't want to use the 175 in it or the 180s or anything heavier than that. These are all pretty close. And you can see that by the velocities, 3,050 feet per second for the 264. Some people will argue it and say, oh, you can get 31 out of it, or even 3150. And others will say, no, you're pushing the envelope. You're lucky to get 3,000. Everybody gets a little bit different velocity in their hand loads and in their factory rifles shooting factory ammunition. So you've got to fudge this a little bit, guys. This is not absolute on any of this stuff. I took my numbers out of hand loading manuals. So they should be safe in most rifles, if not all rifles. And let's just look at those numbers. Now, at 100 yards, it's just almost a dead heat. You know, there's a little more energy advantage in the 7mm because of the heavier bullet, but it starts to lose that, and downrange it's going to be behind the 264 Win Mag. But they're all pretty close at 100. Jump out to 300, and that's where you start looking for some differences in these long-range magnums. And there you see that you've got the least amount of drop, only 2.2 inches, out of the 264 Win Mag. You've got the most energy, 2151. Pretty much a dead heat with the 7-rem mag at 2150, but come on, it's the winner. And wind deflection, you know, they're off by an inch or two either way, but again, the 264 wins. So then you step out to 400 yards, and you've got a 2-inch advantage in drop for the 264 Win Mag, so it's the flattest. It drifts the least, 8 inches instead of 9 inches for the 7 or 11 for the 270, and it is ahead in retained energy. And that's one of the big arguments for the 7, is that it's got more punch, got more downrange punch, by golly. 500 yards, same thing. The flattest, the least wind deflection, the most energy. The winner is the 264 Winchester Magnum. So why isn't that more popular? It should be more popular than the 7. It should be more popular than the 270, arguably from a ballistics standpoint. So exactly what happened, that it just didn't win out. I don't know, human nature, I suppose. I think it was the combination of it burns your throats out and burns your barrels out. You don't want that. I think that really, really did hurt it. And then the 7 Rem mag coming out did it. Another one, though, is in 1964, Winchester went from their controlled round feed, classic rifleman's rifle, to a cheaper push feed with a cheaper looking stock. Just a lot of different features that shooters did not appreciate. And that was just about the same time they were really beginning to appreciate the Model 700. So there was a big swing over to the Remington side for the best bolt action rifles, or at least the most popular ones. I think that really hurt Winchester at the time. Controlled round feed was lost. I took some notes to see if there's anything else on here that I didn't cover. And it was the odd caliber, of course, 26, but I think most Americans could get around that. They're more interested in the performance. Yeah, I think what really hurt also was the fact that they only twisted it to take that 140 bullet. If they'd have increased the twist rate a little bit so they could have handled a 160, I think that 264 would have competed a lot better against the 7 Rem mag. Now, it's also true that at that time, they did not have the slow-burning powders that would really maximize the potential of that 26 caliber. So I think IMR 4350, a surplus military powder, I think that was the slowest burning powder of the day in the 1959, 1960. So today you can use 869 or H1000, some really slow burning powders, and really maximize the potential in that 264. That's about it. That's what I got on for my notes for the ideas that I thought might have hampered that 264. Now, as you can see, you've got a 30-06 standard length case here, and that was one of the big selling points for both the 7 Rem mag, 264 Win mag, 338 Win mag. Here's that 338. And of course, a lot of folks say that was really the parent cartridge. All they did was neck that thing down. And you look at the two and you could say, yeah, that's probably what happened. But of course, wider cartridge caliber, you're not going to burn your throat out on that 338. Way more popular today than the 264. I don't know what else I can tell you on that one, guys, but if you really want to go into some comparisons, I can dive into these. This is going to be running of the 264 Win mag against a lot of these more popular challengers today, a lot of the 6.5. I've got a long list here, guys. Page after page after page. But if you want to look at some numbers, we'll flash them up and go through them. But for those of you who've seen enough and heard enough, here is the bottom line on the 264 Win mag. It's done. I mean, I like it. I like the idea of it. But against the competition today and all these new short fats like the 6.5 PRC, or even the longer ones like the RPM, or the Super Duty Magnums like the 26 Nozzler and the 6.5 300, it's just not going to compete. Plus, it has that belt, and it's got such a bad reputation. I don't think it's at all deserved, but it's just kind of built up in the common ideas amongst shooters that belts are bad. I've just never had any problem with belts. I mean, look at the 300 Win mag, one of the most popular cartridges in the world, been used for everything, and nobody complains about the belt on that thing. Yes, if you're a hand loader, you do have some issues you need to deal with potential stretching at the neck or at the head, and you can have case separation if you don't load it to seat or to headspace on the shoulder. But for your average shooters using factory ammunition, not an issue at all. At any rate, that's where it sits. Now, here are the numbers. I put the 270 Winchester in here with a 150 grain bullet just so you've got kind of a benchmark and you can look at its numbers. Then you go to the 264 Win mag with 143, and then all the rest of them are going to have 143 grain bullets too, except for the Grendel. It just can't handle that thing. That one's using 123. But I wanted to put the Grendel in there, both because several people asked for it and because it's the smallest one with some really surprising performance. When you look at the difference in sizes between those two, to think that the Grendel could even be good enough to take a deer is kind of impressive. But this is an example of good efficiency. The more powder you put into a case behind any bullet, the less efficiency you get out of every additional grain of powder. It's the first few grains that really seem to give you the most bang for your buck. So the 6.5 Grendel just really surprises folks. With what are we looking at here? At 300 yards, you're dropping 7.5 inches with only 7 inches of wind deflection in a 10-mile-an-hour right angle wind, and you're still over 1,193 foot-pounds of energy. Plenty good enough to take deer. So heck of a cartridge with almost no recoil. Look at the recoil, 8.7 foot-pounds. The 264 Win Mag's giving you 29 foot-pounds of recoil. Maximum point-blank range on this little guy, 260 yards. That's farther than most people shoot their deer, so that's why that little guy is really popular. But of course, the 264 Win Mag is made for really long distance work. So then jump to the 6.5 Creedmoor, and you will see on those numbers that as popular as it is, it's really not an outstanding ballistics contender. It just isn't. It's not as good as the 270. It's not as good even as the 6.5 by 55 if it's hand-loaded to its full potential, or the 260 Remington. Both of those can probably either dead match the Creedmoor or add maybe 100 feet per second more. But now the 6.5 Weatherby RPM, that one is doing exactly what the 264 Win Mag is doing. And the 6.5 PRC, where's that guy? Those two are just shooting exactly or almost exactly the same. You're probably going to get 10, 20, 30 feet per second, more or less, with any of them, but they're just all right there in the same ballpark, and you can see your ballistic numbers on the charts. They're just outstanding, but it's going to come down to something other than pure ballistics in your choices on these. Do you want a short action or a long action? Do you want a lighter rifle or a heavier rifle? What do you think about availability of ammunition? You know, the only place you can get 264, I think, is Remington, probably. Now, they're going to have to start up again. They used to make it, as you can see right here. Winchester, of course, still makes it, but I think they only have one load, 140 grain power point, which isn't exactly a high BC bullet. So you almost have to be a hand loader to make that 264 work for you. Whereas the 6.5 PRC and probably the RPM from Weatherby, they're going to be pushing those for the next several years. Now, they may not do any better than the 264 Win Mag did, but I kind of have a hunch they will, because they have all the new bells and whistles as far as fast twist rates, long high BC bullets. So I think they're going to catch on a lot more than that 264. Essentially, the 264 was ahead of its time. Hunters weren't ready for it yet. They didn't have the ballistic sophistication that we do now, and they didn't have the chronographs to do the measuring that would have really shown how good it was. And that barrel burnout thing, I think, just really hurt it. 26 Nosler, of course, that one's going to really be screaming 3,250 feet per second. Well, that's only 50 feet per second more than the Winchester claimed for the 264 Win Mag, but I don't know if anyone ever got it. And of course, it required a 26-inch barrel, and I think the Nosler does too. And the same with the 6.5 300 Weatherby Magnum. So those are the 6.5s in today's market. It really is amazing how changed since the 1960s. How we went from what's a 6.5 to you've got to have a 6.5, if not 4 or 5 of them. So if you guys are interested in that 264, you might find a used rifle somewhere. I wouldn't be afraid of it. If you hand load, you can get the same performance you're going to get from your PRC or your RPM. You're going to be running right on the heels of the 26 Nosler, not too far behind. I think it'll do anything and everything you really need it to do. One more cool fact that I read up and found on only source I could find it was this. The Sierra Hand Loading Manual is the only place I've ever read this. So I don't know if it's true or not. If anybody else out there does, let me know. They claim that when the initial bullets came out from Winchester, they were bore riders. So that was a 2-step bullet. The nose came down, and instead of going to full diameter, 0.264, it was 0.256, I suppose. So it just rode on the lands rather than getting engraved. And then the back half of the shank was full diameter to engrave and seal the bore, which is pretty interesting, but I've never seen it myself. And as I say, the only mention I've ever found of it was in this Sierra Hand Loading Manual. So it would be fun to know if they actually did that. And if they did do that, why did they quit? I don't know. So that's the 264 Winchester Magnum, guys. I don't know if there's anything else you can tell me about it. It would be fun to know. I did a lot of research before I launched this thing, and I hope I got some interesting facts and figures for you to dive into. This is Ron Spomer. Until next time, hunt honest and shoot straight.